Welcome to the Stories Told podcast. This is episode 60, Layers of Loyalty. This is the Stories Told podcast. Two authors talking about stories in movies, TV, and of course, books.
I'm Michael Grayford. I write action-adventure stories in fantasy and sci-fi worlds, sometimes for younger readers and sometimes for adults. And I try to always inject at least a little bit of humor.
And I am author E.W. Barnes, and I write action-adventure, time travel novels, and space opera science fiction. Thousands of years, thousands of worlds. But be forewarned, beyond here, there will be spoilers. Are you ready for the adventure? Let's begin. Welcome back to the Stories Told podcast. I'm author E.W. Barnes, and with me is author Michael Grayford. And today we're talking about the story told in the television series Halo, Seasons 1 and 2. How are you doing today, Mike?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. I'm doing well, thank you. And what's new in your writing world?
Writing world, nothing really new. Just the same thing. Slowly editing the sequel to The Golden Scarab of Balahar. Working on getting that toward what I call my alpha draft, so I can hand it off to some people to have them read it. And other than that, that's it, pretty much. Just, normal business stuff like advertising and marketing, stuff like that. What do you got going on there? Newer, cooler stuff?
No. Same kind of thing. I'm still at about 95% of completing Ecliptic. I've taken a break from it because I am working on some other, business-related things that need to be done. So end of the month, beginning of the month stuff that needs to be taken care of, that kind of stuff. So
yeah,
I'm still working on the audiobook editing on the last story in my time travel series. That particular story will go up on Patreon. Will be available there if people want to know the origin story of how time travel was discovered and how the villain came to be, etc. And I want to do that before the end of the month because the program I'm using renews at the end of the month, and I'm not going to resubscribe to it because I don't see myself doing another digital version, at least not this way, of my books. So I'll be thinking about how I want to do audiobooks in the future. This was a great tool for what I wanted to do, which was to provide my books to people who, for whatever reason, couldn't read the ebooks. And so in the future, I'm going to think about how I might want to do this a little differently. So I've got a little bit of a deadline for myself to get all these audio chapters done. So I want to get that done and be finished with that particular project. I'm looking forward to being finished with this project. It has been a long time.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work, going through and making sure that the words are pronounced correctly, because it's not a human being. It doesn't have an intuitive understanding of how a sentence might be. So, for example, the last thing that I had to correct was I needed the word separate, and she wanted to say separate, which was very different in context, right? So I have to go tell her to do that. And then it takes some time for her to process that. And so, 15 minutes of audiobook can take me an hour to edit, to get pauses in the right place for the right emphasis, to get correct pronunciations, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I'll be glad to be finished with it.
Do you think it was more work than if you recorded your own, or did it save you time if you had wanted to do that?
That is a great question. I think it probably would have been about the same, but it's really actually tiring to record my own. I have recorded the books myself, and I don't have the high quality recording equipment, which also, it might have actually taken more time to do it myself, because I would have had to try to figure out how to filter my recordings appropriately to make them sound good. Whereas this program, everything sounds very clear because that's already set up in the framework of the program. So
yeah,
what I have considered is actually when I do have some, income from these stories, and I'm able to do this, is to record them myself at an actual recording studio with human beings who know how to do the editing. And then that will be, I think, a better product because I will know how to pronounce the things that I want to pronounce.
Right.
I will know where the emphasis is that I want to put in. So, but that will take a little bit of income because it's not, I was able to do, what is this, 5 books for about $60 a piece. And to do it myself with a recording studio, I think will be about $500. And to do it with a narrator who does their own recording and does their own production, essentially their own private recording studio, would be about $5,000.
Yeah.
Per book.
Yeah, per book.
As you and I are very much aware, it's a business decision to decide how you want to present your product and get your product out there to people, make it available to people, and what are the pros and cons of the different tools available for us to use to do this. So it's just that kind of analysis.
Yeah, I've thought about recording mine myself and, voice, narration ability aside, just like you said, the time, and it still takes some expense. Like you said, you got to get, you either have to have a good place to record or make your own. And then there's the whole thing of being able to speak for hours on end, which,
yes, it's a skill in and of itself.
Yeah, I'm not much of a talker, so my voice would probably get tired after like 10 minutes each time.
And that was something I did notice. I would start to get hoarse. I would start to lose my voice because I don't have the training to do that correctly as a human voice actor or narrator would have. So it's all of those pieces that you have to analyze in making a decision on that. When do you think you're going to be finished with your alpha edits for your Tales of Zara book 2?
That's a great question. I'd hoped to be done already, but a lot of other little business stuff crept up. Plus, after finishing the initial draft by I guess it was the end of February, I needed a little bit of a break.
Yeah.
From actual writing, and I like to step away from the story a little bit, for like at least a couple of weeks, just to kind of let it simmer in the back of my head before editing. So, I'm only a little bit into the editing process now. So my goal is to have it done and out to my readers by the end of this month. So hopefully I can do that. But, as you know, sometimes things take a lot longer than you expect. But that's my plan.
Do you make the alpha version available to like your newsletter subscribers, or is that something you do with the beta version?
No, I don't put it on the newsletter at all. It will be on Patreon and Ream. Okay. But because it's still, the alpha version is still very rough, I just basically clean up the initial draft so that it's coherent and consistent throughout. But I'm not doing much in the way of structural edits or character development edits. It's just a cleaner version of my initial draft, addressing most of the notes that I kind of wrote to myself as I was writing the first draft. So it's still pretty raw. If people want to read it, through Patreon or Ream, and they really want to read something like that, then I'll put it there. But I won't put it out to like public until the beta draft, which I'll probably put up on Kindle Vella, because that's after I've done a major edit. Like it's pretty much there, hopefully, with smaller changes left before I do the final draft.
So if anyone is interested in finding out more information about the Tales of Zara and the alpha drafts and keeping up with how that process is going, or interested in reading the Adventures of the Empyrean Guard as it's being written, or listening to the Temporal Protection Course series as the audiobook, all of that information is available on our websites, and those links are in the show notes. So what interesting stories have you come across lately in books, movies, or television?
What have I done recently? What have I watched? I watched the Three Body Problem on
Oh
Netflix,
yeah.
which is kind of cool. It's a very sci-fi show. I haven't read the books that the show is based off of. I haven't seen the original Chinese version of the show that they've done, but this one's done. This one's done pretty well. I enjoyed it. I don't know. It's a alien type story. It's a different take on that. Aliens coming to Earth kind of thing. I won't say too much if people don't know anything about it or haven't seen it, but it's a well done show. I would definitely recommend checking it out. What have you been reading or watching?
We are continuing to watch episodes of Foundation, which you had previously watched and recommended, and I'm really, really enjoying that. I think it's incredibly well done storytelling, and I'm loving how they are moving from storyline to storyline in such a way that it doesn't feel jarring, and it doesn't feel like, clearly they're keeping you intrigued so that you keep watching because you want to find out what happens in the next storyline, but it doesn't feel like it's sort of cheap cliffhanger stuff.
Yeah.
It's just sort of solid storytelling. Okay, so here's this particular chapter of the story, and now we're going to move into a different place and carry that particular part of the story forward. Really, really interesting. So I'm enjoying that quite a bit.
Are you still in season 1?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you're enjoying it. I really like the show as well.
Yeah.
They do a good job of what the book was good at in terms of having an epic scale and feel to the story. And then that expands even more in season 2.
I'm looking.
Yeah, I think it's great. I mean, that might be a cool show to talk about the podcast at some point.
I think we should. Yeah. So we'll have to put it on the calendar. Are you ready to talk about Halo?
Let's do it.
All right. Today we're talking about the story told in the TV series Halo, seasons 1 and 2. And I'm going to read the very brief synopsis that comes up when you type Halo TV series into Google. Master Chief, a cybernetically advanced super soldier, defends humanity from the alien covenant in the 26th century. So do you like this series, Mike?
Yeah, I'm enjoying it so far. Again, I'm looking at this as its own thing, not comparing it at all to the video game series. I played, one, maybe 2 of the games way back in the day when it first came out, and I remember nothing from them, so I couldn't really compare it to the games if I wanted to. So I'm just looking at it as it is. I know some people had issues with, it's not exactly like the game. I mean, that's always the case. But hopefully there's enough there similar to the world where they can still enjoy it. Those people who've played through the games. Yeah, I'm really liking it. I just finished watching the 2nd season, and I'm still enjoying it. I think for me, I'm interested to hear your take on this, because for me, I felt like the 2nd season was better than the 1st season. I feel like it started to gel a little bit more. We started to see where the story was going. We got some, intense battle scenes and, spoilers, character deaths. And I think they handled a lot of that really well. How the battle sequence sort of in the middle of the 2nd season, where it's the battle that's on Reach, I thought was really great. I loved the way that they set that up. I loved how there's a nice buildup of tension and anticipation to it. You're kind of learning what's going on, and you're seeing through the eyes of Master Chief, investigating and like, oh no, this other squad was on the planet still. Why are they on the planet? That means the other guys must be here. The Covenant must be there. Yeah, I really liked the way that they built up the tension to that. And then I thought they handled the fighting sequences very well. And I loved how they handled Vanek's death. I thought that was very respectful, and they gave it attention. A lot of times in shows like this where it's like, yo, there's a battle scene, okay, people are dead and moving on, right? Right? It's like here, it's like, hey, this guy meant something, right? And when Vanek died, he was sort of the personal representative of all the deaths that happened on Reach, which they can't show.
Like
They can't show all those people. So it's like, this is like, hey, they took a moment and said, hey, here's someone that that you followed along in the show. It's like this person died, and it's like it gave it some time to let it sink in. Just like, okay, all those people who died in that battle, let you feel it a little bit rather than just moving on. So anyway, I like the way they did that. They didn't just brush it aside, and then I liked how continued to develop the mystery and the tension of, okay, what's next? Where are we going? How are we going to deal with these? With these guys, they just wiped out our planet with very little resistance. I like the sense of betrayal that they set up with the characters, right? The leads, the leaders who you think are in charge of things, and just let Reach fall, and just they're kind of setting this up, and they're setting them up as villains, but at the same time, when you see them talk about it and you see they understand what's coming and how things are going, and they've run all these simulations, you kind of also understand their point of view. Like, yeah, it's horrible, but they're the ones in charge. They're the ones who have to make the tough decisions. And I even get a sense of like, okay, when Master Chief goes and he sort of runs rogue, he's doing his own thing, you understand his viewpoint and you think, okay, he's the good guy, right? He's the one we're following. It's like he's the one we're behind. But at the same time, I do see the leaders, and I understand their viewpoint, and I wonder, like, is he doing the right thing? How's this going to end up? And obviously, we know, it's a scripted show, so we know they're going to lead us to somewhere. But it does bring up those moral questions and wondering, who's on the right side of things? Is there a right side? Everyone's just trying to do what they think is right. But ultimately, there's that thing in the back of your head of like, well, these people seem like they just don't care that much. So, it makes it easier for us to see them as the bad guys. But yeah, I like the way that they're developing that. For me, the show took a really weird turn toward the end of season 2. Of like, okay, I guess we're now watching a horror show with zombies. I was not expecting that. Like I said, I don't remember. It certainly wasn't in the game that I played or games that I played. So I don't know if that's where the series goes in the source material, but it's an interesting take. I guess it's not exactly zombies, but that's kind of how it feels. Sort of like the Resident Evil type thing. So I'm very curious to see where this goes. They've introduced that new element, and we still don't know who these ancient beings were, who developed the Halo and left little clues on finding this stuff out, and whatever, if they injected genes into a couple of the people, the two demons that we're following, as they call themselves, or at least as she calls them. I'm definitely curious to see where this goes. And I'm curious to see what you think of this season, the show overall, and the turn it has taken at the end of the season.
Well, one of the questions that you asked was whether I agreed with you that season 2 was better than season 1. And I'll have to say yes, except for, and this is my own personal bias, I'm very, very fond of the sort of found family kind of structure in storytelling, which is what you get with Master Chief and his team. They're a family. And so to have a family member lost, I find that very disturbing.
Yeah.
So that was something I was not happy about as far as just my preferring. I mean, I'm a Stargate fan. I'm a Star Trek fan, right? And in those series, you've got your core people who just always stick around, right? And I realize that's old-fashioned storytelling compared to what we're seeing, these days. But it's something that I enjoy. And so that was a disappointment to me. However, I get that that's sort of current storytelling, and that's fine. I don't think it took away so much from the story for me. And some of the things that I really, really enjoy about this are some of the things that you have already mentioned here. I love the complexity of everyone's motivations and the shifting loyalties and the shifting perception of who the bad guy is. I think that's really terrific. When we start, it's the Covenant, right? At the very, very first, actually, in the very, very first scene, it's the Spartans who are the bad guys. Because the first scene are these people sitting around talking about how the UNSC will come and get them because they're insurrectionists. They're trying to be free. And so the Spartans are these bad guys who will destroy them. And then the next thing we know, we actually get to see bad guys in the covenant destroying this settlement, and the Spartans are the heroes. So you, from the get-go, you've got this really complex layering of the different perceptions of who's right and who's wrong and who's good and who's bad. And then layered on top of that, you've got these conflicting loyalty issues, right? Are the Spartans loyal to the UNSC? Are they loyal to Halsey? Are they loyal to each other? And so it's fascinating, and I really appreciated that. I thought the layers that we got to enjoy and the ebb and flow of who we think is bad, who we think is good, what is going on, it was incredibly complex and enjoyable. And I think they did a terrific job of laying down all these breadcrumbs for us to follow to figure out what was going on. The other thing I thought was really good was how we got a really good blend of backstory in such a way that it wasn't an info dump, the way that it wove in to the current present story very well. So we didn't have to worry about, okay, let's get the backstory in and then everything else will make sense. No, they wove in backstory, they wove in history, they wove in the complexities of the characters, I think in a very organic and real feeling way. And I really appreciated that. Like with learning about Soren, learning about John's childhood. All that was just done in a really, I think, very well organic and in a way that made sense to where the story was at the time and where the story was going. So that was pretty much it. I was looking at this very much, since we're looking at seasons, I was looking at it from a very sort of 30,000 foot level to get a feel for the story overall and the universe overall. And so those were kind of my thoughts. Did I touch on everything that you had asked about?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's good. And as you were talking, it reminded me of something like last time we talked about the previous show that we watched. One of the things I mentioned was it felt like there was a big info dump on backstory in Moon Knight of like, oh, here's who these characters are and how they got to there. And you're right. I think they did a much better job of blending this into the story as we're going along, rather than just kind of pausing and saying, okay, here's where we came from. Then I definitely agree with that. And it feels like this is this comment isn't in comparison to Moon Knight. It's just generally it feels like this is a planned out story, right? And like you said, they're dropping breadcrumbs, and we see that there's world building that they've done, and they're revealing things as we go along. Story elements are coming up that make sense and feel natural and connected to the world versus, hey, we just wrote another episode and let's see where this goes, right? It doesn't feel like they're flying by the seat of their pants. It feels like they have a plan, which is good.
There was one other thing you asked me. You asked me about what I thought of the end of season 2.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I hate zombie infection stories with a passion. So I wasn't real thrilled about that. But according to my offspring, that actually is part of the gameplay story.
Okay.
So there we are. But yeah, I was like a little frustrated with that. But if it's consistent with the gameplay story, then we move on. We go through it, right? But I'm not a big fan of zombies.
Yeah, I'm curious to see where they go with it, because I had pretty much the same feeling. It just felt like, oh, we're developing something cool, going this place, and then now we just got like generic zombies out of the out of the blue. Yeah. Not even just that. It feels like I've seen that so many times. It's like it's so non-creative at this point. I was hoping for more, so I'm hoping that the storyline develops beyond that. I mean, it's an interesting element to have this. Okay, there's this other threat that's there, right? Was this a threat that was created by this ancient race? Was it a threat that wiped out the ancient race? Is it something that they're using for like their return at some point? Like, I'm curious to see where it goes. But yeah, I kind of had the same feeling. And to me, it was just such a tonal shift of like, okay, it felt like a different show all of a sudden. But it was, it was only right near the end, so I'm still in it. I'm still seeing where they're going to go with it.
So, on that note, what might you have changed in this series as a writer?
I mean, that was one of the things I had thought about, but if it's something that comes from the source material, I think it's fine. It's like go along with what people had expected, and maybe it's really integral to the plot moving forward. Okay, that's fine. Let that be. Let's see where it goes. Man, I'm trying. I just finished watching, so I'm trying to remember other stuff. I don't know that I have anything from the first season just because I watched it a while ago, and it's not right in my brain. The one thing I noticed as I was watching through the battle sequence where they're going toward the Halo at the end was they set up that scenario such that they sent in the first wave of Spartans, and the ships just got completely obliterated in like seconds. They were just gone. And then they send in the next wave, and we see the people that we're following. Their ship immediately gets destroyed as they're going in, and they're flying there in their suits. And then what's her name? Kai, I think. She destroys one ship, and it's like, oh, now we have the upper hand. It's like, wait, what? How did you get the upper hand? You just destroyed one of their ships. If that was like a super integral ship, like that's the one thing controlling everybody, which again is like a concept used many, many times before. But let's say that that's what it was. They should have set that up as like, oh, that's the one thing that we need to take out, so that when it happened, it kind of made sense. Otherwise, it was just destroying a ship. Like, I mean, they still had overwhelming forces there, and their ships were so much more powerful that I didn't get how that turned the tide of battle. So I would have wanted to have known that if that was going to be the thing, like, oh, it all revolves around this one capital ship. Let us know that and have them, trying to take that ship down, right? If that, or even if they learn that in the battle, like that's the ship, we got to take it down. Tell us that so we know, and then when it happens, we're really rooting for her and we understand that sacrifice a little bit more, because it just completely caught me off guard when they're like, oh, the tide of battle has turned. It didn't make sense to me in that moment. So that's one thing. That's one thing in this season that really stood. It took me out of it for a moment. Yeah, and then the zombie thing aside. What about you? Was there something that you would have improved?
Well, I felt that sometimes the pacing felt inconsistent. And that sometimes we were rushing headlong towards answers, and other times we were sort of meandering. And so that was something, and that was more in the first season than the second season. But still, I saw a little bit of that in the second season too. And it may have just been where the storylines were as they were interweaving with each other. Each storyline can't always be, rising and falling at the same pace, which I understand. So that was just something that I noted. And I'm going to go ahead and disagree with you slightly on when you said that you felt that this story was planned out. I'm going to go ahead and ask for a modifier that this was mostly planned out, because sometimes there feels like there are threads that have not been followed up on. For example, we had this whole big episode of Kwan going back to Madrigal to find her family to continue the insurrection. And then she finds these people in the desert who tell her that she has some kind of mystical responsibility. And then the next time we see her, she's back in the rubble with Soren because the Covenant has destroyed Madrigal. And I kind of felt like there had to have been a different way of getting sort of Kwan's purpose. And now she apparently has a purpose in season 2 of saving something. She's got some kind of magical powers or understanding that enables her to recognize the danger that the universe is in, perhaps from the zombie infection. But the whole magical episode where she goes back and she finds her family, it just felt like that was a bit of a frolic and detour as opposed to a necessary component to move the story forward. And I just, that kind of thing. Or, for example, Halsey's removed from the Spartan program and her daughter is put in charge of it. And then we never see anything come out of that. We've got a lot of setup for that character, Miranda, of the difficulty she has with Halsey being her mother. And, she's not taken seriously, and she's a good scientist too. And then she finally gets what she wants. She's put in charge of the Spartans. She's put in charge of projects. and then that whole storyline seems to fizzle out. So that's something I think that as a writer I might do differently, is just make sure that if you're going to have those elements put in place, that you really follow through on them and make them have value to the story, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I feel like the threads are there, but you're right. It's kind of like it's a bit choppy how they reintroduce those things, because there's a lot of threads going on.
Great word. Yeah.
So it's like, okay, yeah, because there was a number of times where I'm like, Kwanha, and I'm like, wait, where is she now? How did she get here? like, it's sometimes hard to follow some of the characters because they're not the main characters. Or like, wait, where did they come from again? What were they doing? So yeah, I can definitely agree with that. And as far as the pacing, that was another thing I thought in season 2. There was a couple moments, I think it was during the Battle of Reach, where the planet's being destroyed, right? These like cities are getting blown up, buildings are getting ripped apart, and there are moments where like they cut to the people, and the people are just like standing there talking about stuff. I'm like, what are you doing? Like the whole world is falling apart, and you're just having a like casual conversation right now. And that's kind of a smaller like micro pacing issue, but it's like, shouldn't you be like terrified and running while you're having this conversation or something? Just a little thing like that.
So what themes did you draw from Halo?
Oh man, that's a good one. I was trying to think of this because there's so much going on. I'm hoping you have some different things than I do, because I just I was struggling to find out, like, okay, if there's one theme of the story, or what is it? And it's hard to say because it's we've got 2 seasons, right? Many episodes now, and the show's ongoing. But the one thing that jumped out at me was you can't let go of your humanity even in the face of catastrophe. It seemed to be something that we were getting from Master Chief's point of view, right? And this guy who didn't have any humanity at the start of the show, sort of he acquires that, and then he becomes the person who says, who's fighting to keep people alive on even a smaller scale when everything's kind of going, falling apart. So that struck me as probably one of the main themes, but I'm sure there's more. So I'm curious to hear what you came up with.
What I pulled out of it also comes from Master Chief's perspective, and that is about finding loyalty, because as we talked about, there's shifting loyalties throughout this whole series. And Master Chief is sometimes a ball bouncing in the wind, right? He's a soldier. He's supposed to be doing what he's ordered to do. He's supposed to be doing this. He's supposed to be doing that. And soldiers, align themselves, their loyalty, in a very specific way that gives them the strength and the ability to do what they're asked to do. And his loyalties keep crumbling right before his eyes. And so I think for me, what I saw his evolution as the series progressed was one of grounding himself in loyalty, and that loyalty is to himself and his values, which goes to what you said about his being human. And those values are the humanity. And so it reminded me a little bit of Captain America, because Captain America had to find what his values were and then stick with those values throughout his arc, right? From the original Captain America to Winter Soldier, where his values suddenly deviated from that of the entities that he had given his loyalty, to the value of his friendship with Bucky in Civil War that then deviated from the loyalty he gave to the Avengers. And so to me, it kind of reminded me a little bit of that. Master Chief, the theme was Master Chief discovering that he needed to be loyal to himself and to his values. Yeah,
that's great, because you're right, we see that through the different characters as well, right? The people on his team loyal to him, yes, up until a point, and when they're not, and then they become loyal again when they realize, oops, we gave our loyalty to the wrong group. We should have kept it with him. So yeah, that's a good note. I like that. I also, not on the theme topic, but thinking about something you mentioned before with the sort of found family, right? Like, these are people who came together, they grew up together as part of this program, and we learned more about that in season 2, how, they were the only ones to survive the original group, or at least not survive like live or die, but to make it all the way through the program initially. And they were there to the end, right? It's like whatever it takes, they were going to go through. So we see how bonded they were with each other. And it's interesting the choice they made in the story. And again, I don't know if this comes from the source material to do as you said, where they basically get peeled away one by one until it's just him left at the end. And
yeah,
I wonder, I'm curious to see how that's going to play out in the future. Does he find a new group, or where they're going with that? It's an interesting note.
that's a great question. So as an author, what do you take away from the Halo TV series?
I'm looking at this as, like you said, the sort of 30,000-foot viewpoint. And for me, the thing is, don't be afraid to go for longer, complex storylines. If you're writing novels, and if you're, as indie authors and even traditional authors, I think probably now more so than before, you're looking to write series. And if you're going to do a series, there's a couple different ways you can do it. You can have, where it's sort of a serial story, where it's like James Bond type thing, right? Where they're mostly independent from one book to the next. Or if you're going to write a connected, ongoing story, you can make that a lot more complex because you've got a lot of time and space to work with. And we see that represented here. There's a lot of different threads going. As we've talked about, there's different themes going. There's different characters coming in and out. Loyalties are tested. Yeah. So there's a lot of themes to play with, a lot of different story mechanisms to play with in longer stories and series. So that was my takeaway. What is yours?
I had a very similar takeaway. I think it's valuable to add layers of intrigue and have a complex, like you said, complex storytelling and multiple storylines. And so that was one of the things that I think they did really well here. And that's something that I aspire to, is to have very interesting, layered, complex storylines. And the other one was related to kind of when you said that sometimes the pacing and the follow through on the story threads was a little choppy, is to be thoughtful of those threads and their payoffs. Just make sure I'm not springing something on the reader. And that can happen. It's really easy. You get caught up in your own worlds and your own plots. You know what's going on. And sometimes you forget to put it down in writing so that the reader is keeping up as well. So that was my takeaway.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you for joining us as we talked about the story told in the Halo TV series, seasons 1 and 2. A big thank you to our Patreon supporters and all our subscribers. We are so grateful for your support and your encouragement. The Stories Told podcast is available on multiple podcast platforms, and we thank you for liking and subscribing or following, depending on where you're listening. It may not be a big deal to you, but it means a lot to us. If you'd like to make a suggestion as to a book, movie, or a television series that we can talk about in a future podcast, please leave a comment on the YouTube channel, and that link will be in the show notes. You can find Michael Grayford at michaelgrayford.com and E.W. Barnes at 1000years.com, and those links are also in the show notes. Join us next time as we talk about the story told in our favorite Marvel movies. Thanks so much, Mike. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you. I'm looking forward to next time.
And we'll see you next time on the Stories Told podcast.